Okay, we're back live. Hopefully this will actually work. I had to change some stream key around because obviously I'm streaming to multiple different channels as of recently. So hopefully this is going to the right place. The Great Debate Community channel, it will be the after show. Is biblical slavery compatible with omnibenevolence, which was the debate between Emperor Atheist and the Catholic Fusionist. Now, of course, we all know how it goes in the Great Debate Community. We never stay on topic for very long. I'm okay with that. That's just the title that we have for this particular video. And to get us started, we are streaming from the Discord, and by the way, as you can tell, my my voice is shot. Oh my god. Ocean, tell them about the Discord real quick, will you?
It's a Discord. You click the link, you go to the Discord, and then you're in a Discord.
It's not complicated. It's really not. The link to join us is in the video description. The Discord is available to anybody. Come on in. We're in the stream room. There's going to be multiple streams set up for other channels, like if the Geek Room ever wants to run something through here, or if Beyond the Trailer Park wants to, that's fine as well.
Testing.
It works.
Testing, does this...
What's that? Seth?
Oh, I was just testing to see if this worked. This is the first time I'm on Discord.
Yeah, no, it works fine. It's fine.
Okay, cool.
So real quickly, let me give you a brief overview. I mean, obviously, I do side with EA on this. You know, I don't really know how to rationalize any kind of slavery with any kind of omnibenevolence, whether it be biblical or otherwise. So I do take that position, but I don't have a really dog in the fight there. I do agree with him wholeheartedly that all forms of slavery is a form of evil. I don't know any time where any type of actual slavery, and we're not talking indentured servitude, we're not talking about payoff debts, we're not talking things of that nature. We're talking about actual slavery where you own somebody's property and they are beneath you because of the color of their skin or their race or their creed. I don't know how that could be ever justified. I don't get it. I know we don't do a lot with race in this particular Discord, and there's reasons for that. However, because of the topic, I think you're going to have to touch on maybe that's at some point if that people come in talking about race, because obviously slavery has a long history to do with race. We also have General Han Solo in here. We got Maxwell Edison, Ocean, Keltoy, and anybody else who wants to drop in. So with that, I'm going to leave it to you guys. I'll be listening in off and on. But, you know, you want to give your evaluation of the debate there, Catholic Fusionist, or anybody else wants to talk about it, be my guest. And again, if you want to go off topic, that's fine too. We do have people watching from the Facebook page, the official Flat Earth and Globe discussion, which we just had a debate on today with their admin and I think founder of that group, Nathan Thompson. Thomason? I think Thompson was his name. That went very well. That was with Red's Rhetoric. So we hope to have them included in more of our discussions. I know Ocean's looking forward to actually setting up a separate room for Flat Earth. Right? No, he's really not. Trust me. Look how quiet he got on that. But we do want more people from various other groups to be joining us to have conversations of all kinds. So Flat Earth is a thing, so unfortunately. But it's going away. I do think it's dying out. I think that there's been overwhelming evidence to show that Flat Earth just is not a thing. It's one big, just massive, what the hell is going on, conspiracy nutters types. But
yeah, when he brought up Halton up, I was just pissing myself.
Yeah, I know who. I mean, of course, I know who he is. I know all these arguments. I've been around for a long time. I know when they bring up things like Michelson Morley and they say and you know, like Aries failure, and they think that's something like we've never looked into before. You're a physicist.
The thing is,
I haven't, you know, understand the topic.
Halton up just before he passed, he actually admitted that his data was outdated.
He was very outdated. But again, when it came to stellar evolutionary modeling, when it comes to cosmology, things do change rather rapidly. That does not negate Big Bang cosmology. It takes a lot to negate the fact that we had an inflationary period. I don't see any way around that. That's what Big Bang cosmology deals with, that inflationary period. We might not understand what happened prior to that, but we certainly understand there was an inflation of space-time. The mathematics, the science, the physics, everything points to it. So...
You know, Steve, I was thinking like an epiphany took place while I was listening to Red's debate, and I was wondering if it's feasible, though at the same time it could be quite expensive, unnecessary expenses, but you know, for the fun of it, if we could make a model of the Earth, like the spherical model, and a model of the flat Earth to scale, but in a much smaller sense, and include, for example, say the height of a tree or a car or a person. Like obviously, you're talking in light of our spherical Earth. You'll have to make the person very small.
It would be, well, I mean, if the
Uh,
Earth was the size of a basketball, it'd be smoother than anything we've ever came up with. The height of the
yeah, I was
mountains and the
thinking.
depths of the ocean, I mean, it's only like
To be honest,
13 miles, and so you only have a variance of less than 30 miles on a scale that big is insignificant.
yeah. So I was thinking like at minimum something the size of a soccer field, and obviously the person on the surface will be exceedingly tiny relative to the size of the soccer, like circumference wise, and to have because I think we have the latest in technology in regards to optical like lenses and cameras where we can put cameras on the surface and have and do the measurements literally in that sense, but obviously in a scaled, like we're massively scaling it down to that level. Either that way or we do computer simulations. It's one or the
I'm
other.
okay with that. Go for it. If somebody wants to do it, let's do it. But we already went off topic and we haven't even started the program
Yeah.
yet. So I'm sorry there, CF. You know
Sorry.
how it goes. But do you want to talk about the debate real quick? How you think you did? How you think EA did? Do you think anybody kind of changed their position? Because I got to tell you, I think you had a hard position to defend there, CF. I know you for a very long time. You're a good person. You have a good heart. You're not a racist. You're not, you don't advocate slavery. This has nothing to do with any of that stuff. But you are a theist, and so you have to think that certain things in the Bible are true. I get that, and it's a hard position to take when it comes to these types of topics. So I think you did exceptionally well for that. You took an approach that I didn't expect, but how do you think you did, and how do you think EA did?
Well, so I will say this: Emperor Atheist took a verse I actually did not foresee him using. He used one verse from Exodus. What was it again? Exodus 21, verses 28-32. So I was pretty ill prepared to handle that one. On the more philosophical questions, I think that was explored enough, which astounds me because I'm usually the first one to do this, and actually relied on them far more than I would have given him credit for. I thought from the outset he would just be going mostly into the biblical text because that is more of his specialty. So that's where the debate went in places I didn't foresee. But I think what he brought up, I was able to handle, at least give a response. Did well. I think it was in setting up the parameters of the debate and distinguishing how this kind of slavery in the Bible does not commit the Christian to condoning or supporting any other form of non-biblical slavery. I don't think that was touched upon, and I think that it was agreed upon. I don't think saying biblical slavery is justified necessarily entails one thing Southern or Greek or Roman or whatever other kind of slavery is. My justification on divine ownership. I'm really glad that I was able to have that initial foundation that wasn't really questioned that often, as far as I see. I was able to where he was going to go with the verses in other respects, so I'm glad I brought those up first to set up the parameters. And I think I did address the notion of what an all-loving or omnibenevolent God is, which is a God who wills the good for all people, on the will for the sake of the other. Say that the highest will was God himself. What the highest good was God himself. So I think that I did set it up, although I didn't expand on it too, because I did want to take more along the lines of the text, and I was glad to bring up a lot of extra biblical sources to help me defend it that I don't think were touched upon that much by the opposition. So I think that's where I took it really well. I think where I was ill prepared was as that specific verse mentioned in Exodus. He also caught me off guard, and he did it really well with citing Catholic tradition. Just to give one counterexample from the top of my head. Back on it, I really wish I went into the Catholic notion of the doctrine of development, but what's done is done. So I think I could have handled it better, but I'm glad with. I'd always be happy to take up this debate again.
do you think that, I mean, do you take it as in the Bible that they're not using the term slavery as we do now, or they've done since like the 1800s, what slavery meant? Do you take it as in the Bible that they did not mean your ownership of a person, or that the person was less than a person, or not even a human, in some eyes? I mean, and obviously in the 1800s, the slaves, many of them were not even thought as people. I mean, that you take the approach that the Bible does have that, or does not have that type of mentality.
I don't think the Bible has that mentality. You do not lose your status as a Jew when you become and if you're an Evet Canaan, Jews didn't interpret that as losing your humanity. Even the non-Jewish slaves could even convert to Judaism and fall under the lighter sentencing. In that position, you'd most likely do. Actually, that later Talmudic understanding of the Bible that really enlightened me to that possibility. I didn't know on that one. I didn't know about that one until my friend Shadow brought it up, and I'm really glad that happened. And I think the biblical understanding of slavery is all men are slaves of God on permission that we have dominion over anything He owns, which is either our own selves or over the earth.
But isn't that a form of equivocation? I mean, to say that,
I'm actually saying that they aren't. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, biblical slavery isn't equivalent with non-biblical slavery.
Okay.
That's exactly my point.
Okay. So you're not
slavery,
using the term slavery like slave to God to mean the same thing, because I mean, clearly you cannot be arguing that us, if we were theist or Christian or whatever, that we're slaves to God, is in any way morally or even remotely equivalent to what slavery is as far as the owning of another person.
It is not equivalent, although both are morally permissible.
Well, I think the first one would be morally permissible only for the fact if God decrees it, if you want to go that route. But we still have autonomy. We still have our own ability to make somewhat free will decisions. I mean, depending on your free will. But I mean, we're still autonomous. I can go where I want. I'm not accountable to God to say, hey, master, can I go to this place? I go where the hell I want. I don't need his permission. As a slave, you can't just go, hey, I'm going to take a vacation and come back to you in a few weeks, right? It doesn't work that way.
Actually, so the only reason you have the autonomy to the extent that you do is because God himself permitted it in the first place.
So he's a slave owner. So God's a slave owner that's nice enough to give me autonomy, so I'm not a slave anymore?
He's nice enough to give you autonomy. But yeah, God is actually a slave owner who's nice enough to give you... he's like a slave master who doesn't care, or a slave master who cares enough about you that he lets you go on your own.
Okay. I've never heard quite that one before.
Yeah, he's actually on the right track. This, again, you have to think ancient Near East here. I mean, the Yahweh religion offers a lot of... it doesn't remove the slave status, that's for sure, but it does offer a lot of bonuses that the other ancient Near Eastern cultures did not provide.
Oh, so if you choose the right slave owner, you get bonuses? Or we can't choose our
No.
owner. We're slaves to God regardless.
The deity completely reformed the rules of how to own a slave and
now,
what to do with the slave.
But what happens if I want some other deity to be my slave master?
Sorry?
What happens if I want some other deity to be my slave master?
Then you perform the acts of that deity, which is a lot worse.
So that, but a person can't serve two masters. So am I no longer a slave to the first deity, the Judeo-Christianic deity?
If you
right.
were...
No, but that's a New Testament stipulation. That sort of thing is not in the Old.
Okay, but I'm doing right now, so would be under the New Testament. So I think it's still a relevant question.
So in response, So in response to that, I would say, forsake God and serve as a slave to another deity. That is an act of idolatry. You are committing an injustice against God because since He is the one who created you, you are essentially subverting His ownership to that of another creation.
All right, so I'm not giving empowerment to another being, though. Like another God cannot say that they're my master.
Because you cannot take what is not yours in the first place. nor can you give to somebody else what was not yours in the first place.
But I am my own.
You were God's from the beginning.
How?
Satyr is his own god, remember?
Yeah, see, I'm not a man, okay? I'm a satyr. I'm serious. I have goat legs.
And he worships himself.
I do worship. No, I worship Satan because I have goat horns.
Well, since you're a material being, I don't see how that's possible. You're not self-sufficient. You're contingent upon the world around you. You're temporal.
I could be self-sufficient.
Do you know about Ephesians 6, the way Paul argues the relationship between slave owners and slaves, and then the master in heaven, and how there's no favoritism between the two in relation to the master? Like, do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can touch on that just to clarify, because what you're saying is basically Paul's argument in that chapter.
Exactly. The understanding is, since there is no slave, or since no one is either slave or free man, Christ, the understanding is, since both submit to God, in that case, both are made equal on, or put on the same footing, because of their supernatural order, and as it supersedes in amongst the governments. So, in a way, being a Christian slave entitles that both of you really are not one master over another, but rather two servants, except that you're just caught in different governmental or earthly circumstances.
Oh, so he owns me, but it's okay because we're both servants.
But if you read Philemon, Paul implores Philemon to treat his former slave Onesimus, because they're both Christian, as he would a free man. That is, like Paul is. No matter what the institution says, in point of fact, both of them are free men.
No, you just said that we're all basically slaves to God, so no one's actually a free man, right?
Free man, I meant in the context of civic government.
You mean like a?
You see,
like
there's an
citizen?
knee-jerk reaction. The point is, there's a knee-jerk reaction psychologically that it is bad. Slave ownership is bad. Maxwell and myself would agree with that. But if Paul gave, you see, the beauty of the New Testament is they have to try and further reform the perspectives of what was the norm to them, and that is slave ownership, even in the first century. So if the New Testament church radically just annulled the whole thing, and that the church did not practice it, they would be further criticized and put into jail and so on, because they're going against the law of the land. So the way Paul writes in relation that, theologically, masters don't treat your slaves the same way, because you masters have a master in heaven, and he has no favorites, so everyone's equal. So it's just this, a shove in the right direction, so to speak, that over time, hopefully slave ownership will cease, and that's exactly what happens. You see the New Testament being used in the destruction of the whole slave trade and so on.
So you're saying that slave trade and slavery back then was more of a man-made thing, and God was just saying, well, you're going to do it anyways?
Definitely.
So kind of like, I think somebody mentioned this in the debate. So like when Moses allowed for divorce, it wasn't because God allowed it, it's because it was just something they did, and he said, okay.
Exactly, because Jesus said that it's man-made.
But slavery is a lot worse than just saying, okay, we're going to allow divorce. I mean, now you're saying, God's going to look the other way, go ahead and have slaves.
No, God's accommodating the sinfulness of man. That's actually what's happening.
Wait, what?
Sounds like he's
God
being complicit, though. I don't know. I have a hard time wrapping my head around this one.
He never stepped in against the slavery, though.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say
he
that,
does.
Where
in the Old
omnibenevolent God could ever ever
All the
rationalize
rules.
justify slavery.
Because
All
we see outlined in the Bible rules for how to treat your slave, and it doesn't seem like
Yeah.
God ever has anything against that.
Yeah, how come he never says anything against? That's what I wonder too. It's like, okay, here's the rules for it, but you know what?
Because
I don't like it. I think we should abolish it.
there
Whatever.
was-
again, don't
there was
forget,
that-
this is, don't, just quickly, I'll say this, don't forget, it's a slow reprogramming of the psychology of those people.
He's God. Why can't he could do? If he just said, "Hey, I'm God. I don't like it,"
Then
he
he
could
has
change
to-
it in a day.
Then he has to brainwash all of them.
He could have put into the Bible that it is
Don't have a slave. It could have started from the beginning.
it is comparable to blasphemy
Yeah,
to own a
and
slave.
no
He could have put that in the Bible,
and
and
no
they
one
would have
would-
been forced by their religion to follow it. It doesn't
But
matter
no
if
one
they
would-
accept
Yeah,
it.
well,
No one-
are you
No one would
kidding? He
worship
actually-
that deity.
Why all this
Yeah.
subtle moves when he explodes the universe into existence and then eventually makes a book that has commandments in it? Why subtle moves if he's going to give commandments?
I got to side with Seder on this a little bit. Look, if he's willing to put in Leviticus, which I don't think was ever really implemented on the 1600 or 613 mitzvah, if he's willing to put in there, hey, don't eat shellfish, and he thinks that's more important than telling people don't have slaves, I have an issue with that.
All right, so to touch on a few things. One, there was a time when he stepped in to abolish slavery in the Old Testament, and that it was in Egypt where he set the Israelites free. Two, when it comes to a slow reprogramming of human beings, someone should probably mute themselves when they're typing.
Not me.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, when it comes to, as Han Solo said, the slow reprogramming of the human psyche, God can't just command certain things all at once. Hey, don't do that. There's the hardness of people's hearts. It happened with divorce. And of course, an institution that was just as ingrained within them was slavery.
Okay, so you're telling me that God didn't want to go against what they wanted.
Did I finish? Did I finish right now? No. Just to touch on my last point, God actually instituted, do not commit idolatry, and the Jews kept of that one as well. And that's just a simple, don't bow down and worship another image. And yet, we're supposed to believe that under one commandment, abolish, was held as pretty essential at the time amongst most cultures. So, yeah, that's my point. I'm done.
Are you sure? Because you seem to pause for at least 3 seconds at a time and then yell at anybody who thinks you're finished.
That was like 10 seconds, so go ahead.
Sadie, you can go ahead. And by the way, I'm going to be stepping away for a few here. If you want to come in here, again, the link to join is in the video description. If you're brand new, you're probably going to end up going to the stream waiting room, and then somebody can drag you from the stream waiting room to inside the stream if you can't get in or you can't figure it out. Although I have opened up the stream to anybody. You don't have to be a VIP to come in this particular room like normal. So if you're new to the Discord, come on in. But normally you would go to the stream waiting room under the free-for-all, and then somebody would drag you into the stream chat. That way we can eliminate trolls and things of that nature on certain types of topics. So go ahead and continue on, and I shall return.
Forgive me if I'm silent. I'm managing another Discord I'm in. I'm in quite a few.
You can continue the conversation without us, you know. I'm just... General? You muted.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think because
Same.
if I do go into it, it'll be pretty lengthy
It'll be
monologue.
days on end.
No one cares if it's lengthy. Come on, throw it at us. Come on.
Well, like I said, do what you want. I mean, I'll keep this open as long as people are interested. I'm running Hangouts from the Discord more often, especially to this particular channel. So I want to get people used to using Discord. I think it has some advantages over Hangouts. And obviously, we don't
Yeah,
sniping.
I think with this one, it's my voice is a lot clearer, isn't it? Like
You sound
there's no
good.
lag.
You sound good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot less lag on Discord than Hangouts, I've noticed. Because usually you find people talking over each other in Hangouts, but it's usually a lot of times because
the only difference is you can't share your screen.
Well, yeah.
In private calls you can, but not in a general Discord server now. That is like the only downside.
Yeah.
Although if you get a screenshot service, you can just do that. Though that takes time.
Right, which, Steve, I think you'd have to share the chat screen.
Yeah,
like
I
this
don't
main
think
chat
there's
screen.
really a need to do screen sharing at the moment. We'll figure that out later. That just opens up a can of worms. But anyways, whatever you guys want to talk about, like I said, I'll keep this open for a little while I got to go do some stuff, or you can just be quiet and the people come in if they want to come in or not. I don't.
So what else did Emperor Atheist argue?
Well, his primary thing is that he's like what I believe, that slavery in itself can never be morally justified, even if you put forth an omnibenevolent being saying it's okay. But
in my humble opinion, it's never all right for a human to claim ownership over another human. Although that was not the popular opinion of the time.
Right, and I do understand that argument. Look, at times change, God may change people's minds. I do understand that. I mean, obviously, what we believe now doesn't hold true to what they believed, 200 years ago. Obviously, when it comes to divine things. I mean,
you see, let's look at it this way. Like, let's look at it in a minimalistic sense. That, say, the God question is mere, theoretical perspective. So say Yahweh didn't actually inspire these people to behave a certain way. It was all just the way history played out. Even in that outlook, it's interesting to see the entire Old Testament in light of that context and the ancient Near Eastern context, and how when you compare the other ancient Near Eastern stories and laws, the Old Testament counterpart is relatively a lot better to live by, even though there are harsh things in it. There's no doubt in that, but it's a lot more reformed. That's for sure. It's kind of like the I consider the Quran to be a really bad, barbaric set of rules, and the ancient Near East is basically the Quran, and then you just take the Quran and you chop off the bad stuff, or you water it down a little bit, and then you have the Old Testament.
You're saying it's bad, but it's not bad as.
Yeah, it's the best. It's the best form of livelihood if you were in an Old Testament framework.
I never agree. I never agree with the better of two evils.
Out of curiosity, why is it wrong to, just from a secular point of view, why is slavery wrong?
Owning another person is wrong.
Yeah, owning. Like that. Well, actually, I'm surprised you asked that question, because as a Christian, you'd imagine owning another Imago Dei. Like, I don't think that's.
Oh, I know from the Christian. I know from my perspective why that's wrong. I'm just asking from a secular perspective.
I would have to say it depends on how much they're worth.
So
if they're worth bank, I'll own as many people as I can. No, I'm just kidding. I would never own another person. I don't think it's right, even from a secular point of view, because look I don't have to ground my moral justifications on a deity. I can say I tend to go ideal observer theory, but I think that there are ways of saying, as a society that is detrimental to a society as a whole, to have slaves as humans. In other species, obviously, they do have slaves. We know this, right? There are slaved species out there that either use their own members as slaves, or they use other species as slaves, right? But I think for humans, because we have a different sense of morality, because we have morals are what we have. I mean, I think other species might have some kind of type of morals, right? But we have well-constructed moral foundations, and I don't think that under any of those moral foundations I can make an argument of why morality is morally justified. I mean, obviously people can say, okay, for economic reasons. Even then, I don't think it's a good argument. So I don't think I need a deity to say that morality is inherently wrong.
Okay, so just to go to that,
Scott,
you
if you
said
try to
it's
talk, your mic's not working, by the way. And I did. If you're in the waiting room, I moved you down here. Hope that was okay, because if you're in the stream waiting
is my
room,
mic working?
you sound fine, but Spackle was trying to talk, and I didn't see it moving.
Oh, I see.
How's
So
it
yeah,
now? Does it work now?
Yes.
Okay, good.
yeah. Respond to what you said, Steve.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I heard something about it being wrong because, in part, it's socially deleterious, or
Just to that effect. Sure.
yeah, it's something to that effect. Well,
one reason,
but
not the only.
Well, I don't think that reason alone is sufficient, because if you look at when before it was slavery was instituted, and afterwards, a lot of the civilizations actually who instituted that went to flourish more than their counter civilizations. It was usually the ones who instituted slavery first. Alone justifies it, but if you're saying how socially good or bad it was depends on that, then for that time slavery would have been justified.
No, I'm not.
I don't think that
because of consequentialism.
The principle.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the ends justify the means. I mean, we might have there might be better societies with slavery. That's not what I'm arguing at all.
Yeah.
Again.
So then why is it?
There's act consequentialism, and there's what's the other type of consequentialism? But one could argue that the actual act itself of slavery, the act consequentialism, is wrong. I don't remember the definition of it right off the top of my head, though. But it is a type of consequentialism.
But if you were
definition, yeah, the act consequentialism is a claim that an act is morally right if and only if that act maximizes good. That is, if and only if the total amount of good for all minus the amount of total bad, if for all is greater than the net amount for any incompatible act available to the agent on that occasion. That doesn't have to do with the society benefiting from that. That could be just, is it in itself a morally right act to do?
Okay. All right, but notice I actually
morals.
All right, but notice
please forgive my voice. I can tell that's going right now.
And for Max, when you guys are done.
Yeah, go ahead. I honestly, I do got to step away for a few. I've been meaning to for a while. So you want to wait? That's fine. Or you want to go ahead, be my guest? But I gotta go for a second.
I was just gonna say in response to that, I didn't actually put in specific rules of slavery, but rather I was mentioning the institution of slavery. So this isn't act utilitarianism or consequentialism. It's based off of general rules. To institute slavery as a rule within society, not as a particular person enslaving one person, which is more akin to act consequentialism. I think the criticism.
So you're saying you're talking more as the institution of slavery rather than the individual slave itself.
Go as a rule, and I think my critique would fall there too, because societies, when they did institute slavery as a rule to follow in the beginning, or at least through a lot of the early history.
I got you. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a difference between the institution of slavery and the actual act of individually owning somebody. But okay, I got to go. Bye.
So I guess either Maximus or General, I'd be interested in hearing what you guys would have to say with this. I know that it's the whole hardness of the people's hearts, and I believe there's this idea of progression throughout the Old Testament to the New Testament, people learning how to treat each other better. But wouldn't there be a utilitarian aspect to God to allow slavery, because that would help his nation establish and compete? And then my next question would be, then how is that no different than a lot of the American Christians gone wrong here in the U.S.? How we're willing to do things that are largely corrupt and then say it's a means to an end.
Yeah, that's actually, I don't know, Max, do you want to tackle it or should we go?
So, in terms of why I got commanded, and it going to, some kind of consequentialism as opposed to a deontology, reasons why something is good or bad, at least as I understand it, is because it relates to God's command over it. However, just because that's the reason doesn't mean whatever God commands is good is arbitrary. God has prudential reasons for commanding one rule over another. Categorical imperative, that's more of a what's called a practical imperative. Then this would be the perfect way to implement it. But the reason why any rule prudentially is because ultimately the one intrinsic good is God himself, which is the main reason why he rules, which are to bring people to salvation through his commandments and his covenants. What God does is try to maximize the amount of people who do end up with him. So if one wants to consider them, the source of goodness there isn't in utilitarianism, rather it's only in God's command and God's understanding that he's the only intrinsic good. It's just that it only shares a utilitarian aspect insofar as we give actual thinking about morality, or the way in which we institute what commands, or the way God institutes which commands at certain times. Hope that answers your question.
So would that be sort of a form of divine command, in a way?
Yes, it would. I've kind of moved in that direction. It's thing that a lot of Catholic apologists defend. They're more natural law theorists, but I find that this is a way I could comprehend the best way I can comprehend morals, and I'm not sure how General Han Solo would respond to it, but that's how I would.
Yeah, I think Maxwell did a good job in honing in on a like telescoping it down. But my response would have been more the broader picture of the biblical story as a whole. In this case, the Old Testament, and then it finalizing in Acts. So, and Spackle, I'm sure you know about scholars like Michael Heiser, who. So when I've been looking at his work, Unseen Realm, he lays out quite nicely that this particular thing that actually answers a lot of questions, and obviously in this case, this notion of slavery, like how does this work, and your question on the utilitarian nature of it, if there is one, relative to the nations outside Israel. So the way Israel behaves to those nations and vice versa. So yeah, basically, in a nutshell, but the nutshell is speaking about the broader picture, and that is Deuteronomy 32 is the highlight of the reason why this God, this Yahweh, decides to do certain things the way he does it. So specifically verse 8 and 9, starting from verse 7, but specifically verse 8, and that is you see the degeneration of humans from the early creation narrative, holding down towards complete, self-destruction in the Babel story. And then you have this dispersion take place, but it's not just, we're not just thinking naturalism here. We are obviously, you have to put on spiritual lenses on to consider this the influences that are happening to these humans are demonic. So they're dispersed relative to the number of the other gods. And so they are under subjugation of these other beings. And hence, in the ancient Near East, you have, rules and stipulations derived from these deities. So it's Yahweh versus these other deities. And hence, in Deuteronomy 32, Yahweh picks out a pagan, which is Abraham, and then a whole line of Israelites that derive from his family line, derive from the pagan mindset, really, which involves...
Was it the story in the Talmud with Abraham bashing all the idols?
Oh no, yeah. So that would be an extrapolation of the Deuteronomy 32 and prior, the Genesis 11 story, which is not in the Talmud. It's actually in the Targums in the BC period. So you're talking pre-Qumran, like 200 BC, around there. You have the apocryphal story of Abraham smashing the idols, and he was nearly, thrown into a fire. But that's all apocryphal. But the point is that God has lost literally every human being to quote unquote Satan, and he's still not going to lose this fight. So he has to then re-engineer the whole thing back to an Edenic state, which he does through Israel, and then finally those nations are reclaimed. Finally in Jesus, what you see in Acts chapter 2, where the nations from everywhere come to Pentecost and they hear the message. And then it's through the church. The church is now the vehicle by which these sinful human thoughts and patterns and decision making, so one of them would be slavery, will be slowly rooted out. And that's exactly what happens. The church is the forefront. In fact, Chrysostom actually, I was reading Chrysostom the other day, he actually called it sin, that slavery is sin. So, yeah, that's just a quick, the broader picture to explain what's going on. Like basically the utilitarian nature of slavery. So how does Israel relative to the nations, and the nations relative to Israel, the way they behave, and then Yahweh is pulling the strings to bring about the greater good.
This isn't the first time where I think we've seen in the Old Testament God utilize evil and turn it for his good and his will. Have you noticed that?
Right.
The morality with that. What's up, Max?
You're absolutely right. The only reason why Thomas Aquinas actually says this pretty nicely. God, being infinitely good, would not allow any evil, unless insofar as from it he could bring about some greater good. That is the reason why evil is tolerated, because of the fact that it could be used to bring about something greater.
Saying that these were
basically landing as a way of addressing maybe an even greater problem of evil by giving it some kind of theodicy.
They found.
Imagine why not God just create the perfect world by means X, Y, and Z, be it like from the beginning, or be it why not just brainwash people into thinking, oh, slavery is just well, aside from the brainwashing aspect, another thing to consider is if God does create a perfect world or even a better world, I'll be here. Like, we wouldn't be here to enjoy the fruits of that, because part of the reason why we exist, sinfulness of our ancestors, making certain decisions where they ended up meeting other, falling in love, and eventually leading to us, or not love, but reproduction. In which case, we wouldn't be there to enjoy such a world. Or the fact that God himself would probably not even allow our own existence, because he would not tolerate that we've done. But of course, God is willing to tolerate the evils, as ultimately he wants it such that we all come to him, and freely. These would be...
Yeah, bingo. I was just going to say exactly. I mean, because I was then thinking of this whole notion of grace, wherever grace appears, and basically in Acts 17, where Paul says that in former times God winked at the confusion and the sin of the people in the past, but now he commands everyone to repent and turn to Jesus. So Maxwell's on point. Like all those passages were flowing through my mind when you're saying that.
Right. I think, and I think that's part of God's grace. God's grace isn't given because this world with the best amount of maximal goodness. You could always just imagine a world with one better person. I think the reason why is because God creates a universe like he election because what he decides to do with his mercy, not because of anything we have done.
How much do you think we'll get wrong when we get to heaven, and how much do you think we'll be surprised about our theology being off?
I don't know. Depends on the person. Back to this old joke where people are offered there's a heaven for regular people and a heaven for theologians. The heaven for regular people is enjoying the beatific vision, and for theologians, heaven is just taking classes on the beatific vision.
Or the other one I heard, just quickly, the other one I heard was if there's a big line, like a queue, at the gates to enter heaven, don't get into the line of the theologians, because it'll take longer for that line to finish than a non-theologian line. So,
yeah. I think when it comes down to it, I'm going to have much more fun learning about where I got it wrong rather than where I got it right. So,
I think the problem. Oh, sorry.
Quite a bit, and I don't think it's actually going to be. I don't think it's really we're going to be surprised by, but what we didn't even think of.
And I'm not trying to be like disheartening or anything like that, but if we, and I'm not saying stop trying to understand theology and stuff, but it seems like it seems like to me that Scott just totally distracted me. I'm sorry, my husband is just so distracting. Said something really inappropriate and had to mute my mic really quick.
You were saying you weren't trying to be a downer, but
you were doing okay.
Inappropriate.
Oh, never mind. He was doing Vanilla Ice. I didn't know what he was doing. He was doing something and he was whispering creepy. Okay, what was I saying? I'm so sorry.
You said you didn't want to be a downer, but
like I was thinking, like, we don't understand the universe. You know what I mean? We're always learning things about our own universe and how stars devour each other and what a black hole really is and whether or not dark matter is a thing and there's always this new discovery, and we haven't discovered every thing in the ocean, even on our own Earth. And so if we don't know much about our creation, how much more do we not know about our creator?
Probably quite a bit.
When some people are so confident what God wants. I don't know. Sometimes I just don't know.
It's not that I'm confident myself. It's just that this is probably the best answer I can think of given all my background evidence. I think that's basically how it works with pretty much all knowledge.
And it's tough because you could make a hypothetical. Let's say God throws down the law and says, slaves. And then, that would take Israel out of the competition for building a nation at that time because everybody had slaves. And that's how you got things done. So let's say God throws down the gauntlet, says, sorry, you guys can't do this. And you would be having to argue a hypothetical. So what if God didn't allow slavery? Would Israel be able to establish themselves as a nation at that time period? Would that even be feasible? And the other thing is too, would transatlantic slavery, centuries later, be still unavoidable?
I mean, I don't think it would. I think it would have been avoided, but only because there would have been no United States. I mean, there might have been who knows? Slavery might have even lasted for a longer amount of time without establishment of Christian Europe turning over to the Protestant Reformation, turning over to Enlightenment thought, turning over to post-Enlightenment thought, about which the abolitionists were a part of. But to be fair, some of those abolitionists were Christians, including John Wesley. That kind of thing, like, historical hypotheticals are hated by historians. No real way to answer them, or to answer what would have happened. Is the difficulty there?
Was God omnipotent or not?
You mean omniscient?
Yeah, is God omnipotent or not?
You mean omniscient or omnipotent?
Omnipotent.
Yes, he was.
So he could avoid. So he is. Will be.
Point?
Yeah. Then what do historical hypotheticals have to do with anything?
Saying that from perspective of our knowledge, not from God's power.
Well, you're talking as if biblical slavery was necessary in order to avoid certain historical outcomes. But if he's omnipotent, there's no need for that eventuality because he's omnipotent. He can avoid any historical outcome.
Right. So actually, when I first mentioned that in terms of historical alternatives, and from our perspective, because we are not in a position to know them, in a position to question whether or not it was right to institute biblical slavery or permit biblical slavery, because that's just one of the facts that he takes into consideration when.
I'm not posing an epistemic question. I'm posing a moral question.
The moral question, I'm coming at it from a position of I'm coming at it from a position of or giving a skeptical theistic response, which is given that there is a mass amount of information that we lack, a position to question whether or not God made better judgments regarding whether to permit it or not, and especially concerning what else he wanted to bring about from said outcomes. So omnipotence does not, for example, mean God has the ability to not have the ability to intervene in people's everyday free will actions without, at least unjustly.
So God can't God's omnipotence means that he can't intervene in people's free will actions?
No, he can't. I think what Maxwell's trying to say is that the way everything played out is in light of the fact that God is omnipotent.
My point.
What's the demonstration of that?
Right. So this is my point. Can and can't do, and what is omnipotence? Omnipotence is the ability to do all things which are logically possible. That much I recognize.
Correct.
That what does logical possibility entail? Well, logical impossibility does entail that no contradictions can come about. Some things God can't do.
So does forbidding slavery in among the Hebrews during biblical times logically contradict any kind of historical outcome?
To that, when it comes to what God can't do, one of them would be, of course, doing something immoral. God is a necessary being, a being who has the same moral character in all possible worlds. So, hence the definition of is God could not.
Isn't slavery immoral?
Kind of building up to there, if you don't mind. God himself could not do something which is logically possible in all worlds. including do something which changes the essential nature of his moral character, to of permitting slavery. It is wrong to, I'll say this, it is wrong to permit slavery unless there is a morally sufficient reason it should be permitted. Now here's the thing. Demonstration regarding why God wouldn't have, in principle, a moral reason for permission. It could. There are plenty of things that we don't know about ancient peoples, alternative histories, what else could have unfolded that God would be in a better position to know. Equivalent of walking into, well, actually it'd be a worse equivalent of walking into a laboratory, looking at scientists put together an experiment, any idea of any of the background science. Like, you might have a guess at what they're doing from a limited perspective, but you're not really in an epistemic position to know.
I actually am in an epistemic position to know.
Scientists are about God.
But with scientists, I am.
Imagine if you were a non-scientist. Though. That's the point.
Even if I'm a non-scientist, I'm in an epistemic position to know. It is possible to explain to me, and to explain the logical basis for the conclusions of a science. It is possible, right? It doesn't matter how uninformed I am. It is possible for me to become informed.
The fact of the matter is you are not informed when you walk in there. I'm speaking at first glance. Things.
But it's possible. It's possible to become informed. But you're saying that with God, it's not possible to become informed of the reasons for his actions.
Well,
correct? Do I have that right?
You have that right, and for good reason. Finite beings cannot comprehend.
What's your argument for that?
Contradicted, and you're asking for finite beings with finite knowledge to have infinite knowledge. It would be kind of like it would be the equivalent of putting the ocean in a coffee mug. Well,
okay, what's your argument that finite beings can't have infinite knowledge?
Infinity is a far greater quantity than any finite number.
Well, these are abstract principles. I mean,
or logical contradictions.
You know, they don't actually take up space or anything. I'm just not hearing an argument yet. You said that finite beings can't have infinite knowledge, and I'm not. I heard an analogy, an example, but I'm not hearing an argument why a finite being can't acquire infinite knowledge.
Okay. I believe I gave you a response, and I think it was a particularly good one. I think the point of this analogy you're trying to bring up are very sides of the points. When I likened the analogy to putting an ocean into a cup, my point is you're fitting something with greater quantity, lesser quantity. Likewise.
Well, that's disanalogous because knowledge isn't a substance.
Here's the question: is a finite set limited? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Infinite set limited? Yes or no?
It depends on what do you mean by limited.
Is there a point where it starts and stops?
Are you asking me are infinite sets finite sets? Is that what you're asking me?
Not the definition of finite.
Yes. Are infinite sets finite?
Obviously not.
So, like, what I'm saying is, finite finite minds are not infinite minds. Able to comprehend what an infinite mind does. You're essentially
How do we know our minds are only finite?
Starters. Well, for starters, can you comprehend every number from all the way onwards without stop?
Yes, I can.
If not now, then maybe a few 100,000 years in the future, or with a machine to help me do it.
No, I can comprehend infinite sets. I can comprehend an infinite number of infinite sets. I can count them.
Okay, can you tell me the solution to Goldbach's conjecture?
No, I don't know that.
Your mind is finite.
Can I jump in for a second?
Of course my mind is finite.
You don't have...
I don't think that a mind can be infinite, because no matter how you're going to be defining it, it's still going to be limited by the fact that it's a mind.
What's the argument for that?
It's by the definition of it being a mind. It would be limited to being a mind, so it wouldn't be able to be infinite.
Then you're just saying a tautology.
Right, I'm saying that a mind being an infinite would be a violation of definition.
Why should I accept your definition?
I mean, unless he's meaning a mind in a mind being everything, which would make it kind of a useless word. Why are we using the word mind to describe that?
Well, look, all I know is that I have a mind. I'm even a physicalist. I believe that minds supervene on top of brain states in some way that is unknown at this time. And yet I know for a fact that I can comprehend infinite numbers, and in fact I can count countably infinite sets. I know how to do that. And so, because that's a simple mathematical operation, you can count infinite sets, at least if they're countably infinite. If they're uncountably infinite, then you can't, but you can still manipulate them. So the claim that finite minds cannot possess infinite knowledge seems to me to be at least in question. It seems to me it's at least possible that the nature of abstract objects, such as mathematical objects, including infinite sets, is such that finite minds can comprehend them and understand them.
But, alright, and so, well, let's have a thought experiment here. Two people. Let's say one person was commanded to count from 1 to infinity. 100 million. Let's say that after years of counting. Another person is just starting. None of them are any closer to reaching infinity because they still both have an infinite amount of numbers to go. That seems to me that any even temporal space to count out infinity is limited. How a mind limited by time and space is going to be attain infinite knowledge.
Are you under the impression that comprehending and counting a countably infinite set requires enumerating every element? You don't have to do that. There are mathematical operations that allow you to count a countably infinite set.
Well, I mean, if you don't numerate them, then I don't know how you'd have infinite knowledge of everything within that set.
Well, you count them.
Okay,
there isn't just one path, is what we're saying.
Yeah, but by counting them rather than enumerating them, you would still be various elements within those sets, though.
Well, this seems like an unfruitful line of discussion. The point was that slavery is immoral. God permits slavery, therefore God is immoral.
Why is okay? So permitting
to get us back on the topic, since we got sidetracked in this silly conversation about infinite sets.
permitting something that's immoral is not the same as actually doing something that's immoral.
Yeah, it is.
By that
it is.
definition, Hitler only gave the order to kill the Jews.
That's true. That's true.
But the order was active, so it wasn't just a permission.
Yes,
it was...
he gave the permission, and his soldiers carried it out. Hitler never strangled a Jew to death. He never flipped the switch.
Just because something is not necessary, it wasn't necessarily the case.
I don't think this is a productive argument for you to pursue, but please do go ahead.
Certainly. So when it came to Hitler, so just because permitting something is immoral in certain circumstances doesn't mean it is therefore permissible in all circumstances.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does mean that. I mean, if you believe in objective morality, it certainly does, right? Which I assume that's what you. I assume that you believe that morals are objective, and to be objective means that it is wrong at all times and in all places.
Oh, you know
to own human beings as slaves.
Oh, hey, Brenda. Hey, real quick.
Would you agree with that statement? That it is an objective moral fact that it is wrong at all times and in all places to own another human being as a slave, as property.
Real quick, if I can jump in. I want to apologize for the outside feed. I didn't realize I actually had the guitar plugged into the line input. That's why you guys can hear it. Because I'm like, wait a minute, my mic is turned off. How are you hearing this?
I haven't heard.
No, the inside won't, because I'm streaming through OBS. So the outside's been hearing me tune my guitar, and they're like, what the hell is that coming from? I realized I haven't plugged into the line input. That's why you guys heard it. Okay? So, sorry about that.
All
I'm
right,
plugging now.
No worries. So this is actually a good... All right, so...
Steve can tune a guitar, but can he tune a fish?
Yeah, it's tuned.
I thought it was funny.
I laughed.
No, you need to jump into a black hole and kill yourself in the most infinite way possible.
We'll have a jam session.
Spaghettification would happen rather quickly. I wouldn't feel a thing, I don't think.
Well, see, that's why I told you to do that. I want you to kill yourself. I don't want you to be
tell me this is off. I just tuned it, and that's perfect.
You gotta up-tune it and then tug on the strings a little bit.
Anyways, can we get back to the topic?
No.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead. We'll have a jam session one of these nights. I've been practicing a bunch of Metallica songs and other things, and relearning on my chords and scales and crap like that, and music theory, because
it's so hard with lag.
Yeah, well, that's what I got to figure out. The biggest issue I'm having is like we were jamming with RSC the other night. There is a little lag, so it's hard to get the timing down, right? So we'll figure it out. There. Go back to your topic, and then we'll jam later on, guys. Go ahead. Sorry. Peace.
Well, it seems pretty straightforward to me. The Bible clearly suborns slavery. Slavery is immoral at all times and all places if there is such a thing as objective morality. And so it seems to me that the Bible and therefore God is clearly immoral.
Is wrong. And this is what, and I will actually justify in what circumstance slavery can be morally acceptable.
That would be cool. I'd love to hear that, please. Thank you.
Very much so. So let's actually make a distinction here between the slavery of man and the slavery of God. The slavery of man actually goes back to Greek, can be found in Greek philosophers and just people making more empirical arguments for why slavery was. They thought that there were really men who were born of two natures, one to be servants and slaves, and the others to master over them because they had superior qualities. Bequeaths this. So it's a natural law of sorts. To the biblical understanding, man has no natural self-ownership over him or herself, but rather, as it says in 1 Corinthians, and all that it contains. That includes men, territory, earth, animals, what have you. because of what God says in 1 Genesis 26, let us make man after our own image, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth. On the earth, Genesis 1:26, that God instituting within the context of the Old Covenant, that it can be permissible because you cannot give what is not yours, nor can you take what does not belong to you. Even give his own life in the servitude of slavery, even if he wanted to do so voluntarily, because in the first place. Furthermore, no man can also, because it was not his to have taken away, but rather God's from the outset. It all goes back to the question of who had proper ownership in the first place. But on a secular viewpoint, someone could just justify slavery because, oh, well, you know, it's my body, I have self-ownership, and thus I can sell it off to another person. And some might say, well, a consenting slave is really a contradiction in terms. Well, why couldn't somebody, in theory, just sell themselves off to another human being, put a computer chip in their mind, and have them do slave work?
Why is it moral to own another human being?
So the defining principle is no person can give what is not his, nor take what does not belong to him in the first place. Because God, including human life, are God's in the first place. They're his to give at his will and his disposal. That's the understanding I would put forward.
Oh, okay. So the Bible clearly says that people can own other people, and therefore the Bible is clearly advocating an immoral system.
Well, with divine permission only, which only happened during the time of ancient Israel. All other forms of slavery, no Christian is ever committed.
So is it moral to own another human being or not? Which is it? Make up your mind.
Principle. Just because you think there are certain cases doesn't mean
you said it's okay. You say it's okay if God gives you permission, right?
On that caveat only, not under all caveats.
Well, sure, that's fine. I accept that.
But I would actually like to hear why somebody, under a secular humanist perspective, that people are self-owners, why you can just sell yourself into slavery.
Yeah, I'm sure you're anxious to change the subject, but the subject is, why is it moral for you or any human to own another human? And you said in response that it is moral when God permits it, because God is the ultimate owner, and therefore it is moral when God gives us the permission to own another human being, right? So that's not objective morality. That's a conditional subjective morality. That's not objective morality.
You and I have a very different understanding of what objective means. And by the way, I wasn't anxious to switch the topic. My perspective, my counter argument was humanists would be under the same boat because they consider human beings to be self-owners in a sense. Justify selling themselves into slavery in principle too, if they so wanted to choose so. So,
my understanding of objective is that it is not up to me. It is not up to the individual. But you say it is up to the individual. And that's not subjective. I mean, that's not objective.
All right, so objective does mean...
Unless it's objectively up to the individual.
I mean, you said it's up to God whether or not, if on his say-so, I can own another human being. That's not objective, that's subjective. God is a subject, right? If it was objectively the case that it is always and at all times impermissible or immoral to own another human being, then that would simply be the case, and there would be no conditions under which it would be permissible, because that's what it means for something to be objective.
For something to be... So the good is not a property which is commanded by God, which supervenes on the command of God. If you God
isn't good?
that God isn't good. What I said was goodness is a non-value property. Sorry, goodness is a value property which supervenes on God's command, which is a non-value property. Much the same way that certain physicalists like to say that the mind supervenes on the physical brain. In terms of why God's command is the good, those two things are just the good is something which supervenes upon that, and that is something which is objective about the world in the same way that the mind is objective in a sense, as it supervenes on.
In virtue of what is it that makes it moral to own another human being?
I don't get it. If God owns all people, essentially, how can I, in turn, own a person? That sounds like I would be stepping up on God's authority there.
Yes, that's exactly my point. That's why all forms of slavery that do not have the permission of God are considered to be immoral. God, for
let me try a different tact. Oh. It is immoral for me to have. It's immoral for me to have a Ferrari, right? It is an objective fact that it is immoral for me to own a Ferrari.
Because you become a douche.
Because yes, then well, that's consequentialism. Okay. It is simply an absolute immoral. It's an absolute categorical moral rule that I cannot own a Ferrari. So I go to somebody who owns a Ferrari, and they give me permission to have the Ferrari.
Okay.
Have I broken the moral law that says I am not permitted to own a Ferrari?
If the owner, which you got permission for, let you possess their Ferrari, then you are not breaking any moral code, because that Ferrari was given, at least for a time, by its proper owner.
But the moral rule that we accepted beforehand in my first premise is that it is always and everywhere immoral for me to own a Ferrari.
And your first premise would be wrong. The first premise is it's only wrong when you take it from people.
The first premise is a stipulation. I am stipulating, and I get to stipulate that this is simply a hypothetical. I get to stipulate the terms of the hypothetical. Under the terms of the hypothetical, it is an objective fact of the universe that I may not own a Ferrari. I go to somebody who owns a Ferrari, they give me permission. I take the Ferrari. The question is what I am now in possession of the Ferrari, have I committed an immoral act? The answer is yes, I have.
Okay.
Him giving me permission does not negate the rule that says that I may not have one.
Okay. So now you're saying there's a good over God, which would actually violate one of the stipulations of the Christian worldview. So I'm not understanding the difference here.
Well, that's not my problem.
Max, are you a divine command theorist?
Actually, I take a view. It's a type of divine command theory. It's a view more specifically called divine prescriptivism. It's this notion that value properties, such as the good, supervene on non-value properties, and that all good are the means by which becomes good in light of God commanding it. So, for example, God himself would be intrinsically good, goodness itself. He commands a certain thing to be done. Goodness supervenes on top of that by way of his commands.
Wait a minute. How can it supervene if God is already goodness itself?
Well, it supervenes. Oh,
it just does? That's your answer? That's your answer? Because you said God is good himself, and then on top, and then when he issues the command, goodness supervenes on his commands. Well, that's just incoherent.
When I said goodness itself, I mean goodness in the universal sense. Whereas whenever God commands a certain thing to be done, such a thing becomes a particular instance of being good.
Well, that's not supervenience, though.
How does
It's
it not
not.
supervene?
It's not.
Explain it further.
I didn't catch that sentence.
Further, can you explain why that is?
Because you're saying God's nature is goodness, right?
Right.
So his commands are good because God is good. That's not supervenience. Supervenience is when a property overlays on a lower substrate property or substrate, right?
Okay.
So water is H2O, but H2O isn't wet. But wetness supervenes is a property of water. It supervenes on top of the H2O, right? But you're not saying that you're saying that H2O is wet. That's what you're saying. And that it acquires its wetness by wetness supervening on top of wetness. I mean, it isn't making any sense. I can't make any sense of this.
It sounds like it makes sense until it goes through your filter, and then I'm like, what?
That's not a very substantial reply. I'll just repeat that one.
So just to use parts of goodness.
Brenda has upper level perspective mechanisms.
I believe that it's more appropriate to say that if God is goodness, and that if something is good and it supervenes with his command or whatever, that is like wetness supervening on top of wetness.
Wrong perception mechanism.
Well, so the good supervenes on. So everything that is good. So goodness as a property supervenes on all. As a normative property supervenes on anything which can be considered descriptive, be it God, his commands, those with fulfilling of them. The understanding is it starts with God as the source, and anything else, the first or central source.
What makes God's commands good?
God's commands good. Oh, the fact that he wills them.
Okay.
Might makes right? Question mark.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just what he said.
I said
what makes that's a subjective. That's what you literally just said.
No, I didn't say.
I just quoted you. I quoted you. You said what makes God
right. I said will. I said his will makes something good. I didn't say his might makes something good.
But what about his will makes it good? Is it because he's bigger than us? Is it because he made us? Because then that's might makes right.
No, I don't need to go past
God is good because he's good. Don't you know that? God is good because he's good.
Brenda, why does it always sound like you're typing when you talk?
I'm playing a game at the same time. I'm sorry.
Alright, so I'll break this down a little further. I never said it's his might, I never said it's his position in the world. Of course, everyone else likes to put words in other people's mouths, but...
Okay, I don't want to do that. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Here's the problem.
I asked you...
You're not describing anything, so I'm forced to make my own ideas.
I asked you, what is it that makes God's commands good? And you said... It's God. God makes God's commands good, right? That's a tautology. It's just uninformative. It doesn't tell me anything.
Right. So there is such a thing as synthetic identity, and just to use the whole H2O is water analogy, it wasn't to say H2O is water isn't true by definition. It's actually a scientific fact we discovered. Our in terms of our understanding of goodness and our understanding of God, it's known that both these things are identical as a means of knowing, in the same way that science made it as its own means of knowing that H2O and water themselves are identical. In terms of why, and that is how we can say the to the will of God, and it is something which we can't, and that is the position I'll defend here. It's not a subjective claim. It's not a claim which is tautologous or empty. It is a claim that is made substantiated as a form of knowledge by means of revelation.
Yeah, I don't think so. You're claiming that revelation is a source of knowledge? Did you hear me?
Yes.
I just heard a car go by and saw that.
Is revelation a source of knowledge?
Yes.
Really? How does that work? I'm really interested to find out.
Sarcasm strong with this one.
Simple. When someone who knows more than you reveals the truth to you, that thing you can say derivatively that you know something now too.
Interesting.
That's begging the question.
I beg. All I did was explicate what revelation was.
No, you begged the question because your conclusion was in your premise.
Excuse me, am I allowed to speak in here as well?
No. No, you can speak. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just asking. I don't have any.
What was contained within the premise that is in the conclusion? If someone knows
knowledge.
more,
The word knowledge was literally in your premise and then in your conclusion.
else knowing are not the.
That's begging the question. You said, I'll repeat it for you. You said when somebody knows more than you, and they reveal something to you, then you know it. And that's begging the question because in the premise, A knows more than me, contains the word knowledge, which you're concluding in your which is also present in your conclusion, which is now I have some knowledge. That's begging the question. That's what the definition of begging the question is when the conclusion is present in one or more of your premises.
And somebody else knowing something though aren't equivalent.
I'm sorry?
You have what?
I think I missed part of that sentence.
You knowing something and another person knowing something are not equivalent though. There is such a there's a distinction between having first-hand knowledge and having second-hand knowledge. If you have knowledge because somebody in a more epistemically authoritative position gives it to you,
okay,
then you can say you have knowledge in a.
Okay, I'd like to impart some knowledge to you. Can I do that?
Oh, can you?
Yeah.
Can you?
Well, according to you, I can. I can just reveal it to you, right? I mean, that's how it works, isn't it?
To be in a position to do that.
I'm in a position to do that because I have knowledge that you lack, and I can give you that knowledge simply by revealing it to you.
What knowledge is it that? What knowledge do you have that I lack?
Well, I would say there's a great deal, but I just want to get from you a confirmation that this is how revelatory knowledge works.
All right. So revelatory knowledge works by dint of God revealing something to you.
Well, that's just special pleading.
Right. Oh,
You're just special pleading now. Are you saying I can't reveal knowledge to you? I mean, because the example you gave was just of somebody having knowledge that somebody else lacked and then revealing it to them. I have knowledge that you lack, and and if I reveal it to you, then you can have that knowledge, right?
So I was under the assumption you were talking about revelatory knowledge, and
Well, yeah, of course.
Okay, well, but, all right, not necessarily. So that's why you want a definition about that for me. Not necessarily when somebody teaches or explicates to you about anything. The reason why you could say you have knowledge when you learn it in the classroom, from a person in a position of authority, is because they have that particular position, or at least it's been demonstrated to you that they are in such a position. Wants to tell me something about physics, and they're a physicist, then I have a good grounding to think that what they're saying is true, or more likely to be true than if somebody in my introduction to physics class, or even someone who just graduated high school knows. I mean, that person himself could be right too. If he's not in a position to tell, in a position of epistemic authority.
So it's not true that revelatory knowledge works by somebody who knows something revealing the knowledge to you, and then you have acquired that knowledge. That's not how it works?
Revelatory knowledge is when somebody who is of an epistemically authoritative position tells knowledge to you that you gain as a secondhand source, not by means of demonstration.
And what is it that makes that true?
As it being true.
The first words of your sentences, I'm not getting them. Most of the time I can figure it out, but this time I couldn't.
Do you know what the term... So when I say the term epistemic authority, do you know what I mean by that?
No. But previously all I heard was authority, and the last fragment of epistemic. So, but still, I don't know what epistemic authority is.
Okay. So, authority is a person or a group of people who are in a position such that they are more privy to knowledge. Again, epistemic authorities are people who are in a better position, first-hand knowledge. So, an example of this would be biologists. People appeal to biologists when they want information on evolutionary theory. Even if one biologist obtains their information, if there's a consensus of biologists about evolutionary theory, justification to know that that evolution itself is a rational and most likely true doctrine. Becoming any clearer now?
Well, parts of the words are cutting in and out. However, I'm just not. You're just saying that there are these authorities who are in a position to know, and that in virtue of them having this knowledge, they can reveal it to me, right? And then I can have their knowledge. Did I get that? Did I get that right?
Close. The disconnect is you're not making distinction between knowledge that's had firsthand and knowledge that's had secondhand. First-hand knowledge is something you can have direct access to. Like for the example, experimentation, having the background information to read peer-reviewed articles, some along these lines. Secondhand information doesn't come from the fact that you yourself have done that work, who are in a position who can do that work, reveal what knowledge they've acquired in doing so. Better?
Okay, but I don't see how this fits in this is first-hand and second-hand knowledge. I thought we were talking about revelatory knowledge. And your claim was that God can just reveal knowledge to you.
Right. And what I'm
and-
saying. No, right. And what I'm saying
Right,
is.
you didn't say anything about second-hand knowledge. So I would take from this that God can only give you second-hand knowledge. He can't give you first-hand knowledge.
But second-hand. Right. But that's exactly my point. Revelation does grant you a form of knowledge. It's just not first-hand knowledge.
Real quick, Catholic, you've been cutting out all through the conversation at some of the more crucial points in your argument.
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
Not like terribly common, but it happens, and it's causing a bit of confusion, obviously.
Testing, 1, 2. Can I be heard now, or am I still cutting out?
I mean, it's every now and then, at like the beginning of a sentence, your mic will do this thing where it picks up your voice, but there's a lag on when it begins to record your voice.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good description of what's happening. I mean, I'm picking up a lot of the sentences, but not all of it.
But now, is this better? Is this better?
It seems to be.
A microphone that probably touched my headset, so that might be the issue. Heard now?
Yeah, I think.
Right. So when I was speaking of revelatory knowledge earlier, that was the point I was trying to get at. First-hand knowledge, and by dint of revelation, you have a second-hand knowledge that onto you. That is how the relationship of knowledge between man and God works. Demonstrative knowledge.
So it's not demonstrative knowledge. Is that what you said?
Yes, it is not demonstrative knowledge. It is knowledge that is more inductive, if you will.
Oh, okay, cool. Could you explain the inference to me then? If there's an inductive inference going on, I'd love to know it.
Appeal to authority isn't necessarily fallacious. It's only fallacious in a deductive or demonstrative sense, because if one was to say, for example, if one is to speak of a deductive syllogism, the conclusion is only true if the premises are sound. The form of the syllogism is valid. In order for it to be sound, of course, the conclusion always has to follow. Inductive or even abductive sense, the conclusion doesn't always have to follow. It just has to be, although by different means, not. Likewise, when I'm speaking of God giving us a kind of second-hand knowledge, or we're claiming a knowledge that's justified given divine authority, it's not something we can say we know in a demonstrative sense. It's just something we can say we know given the place we have in terms of revelation of epistemic authority, namely God Himself. I can't show you by means of but it is still considered to be knowledge because of the place God has within the universe.
Okay, so the original claim was that we know that God is good because God has revealed to us that He is good. And then we've been on this long discussion about revelatory and primary and secondary knowledge, right? And so the way that we know that God is good is because He told us He's good.
Hitler told his people he was good. So that's not an argument, really.
No, I find it unconvincing.
Okay, so I would just dispute whether or not Hitler was in a so I would just disagree that Hitler is in a position to tell us whether or not he is good. I don't think he was an epistemic authority on that.
How do you know God's in a position of epistemic authority?
I was just about to get to that point.
Cool.
So when it comes to the truth of Christianity, or why I would hold it over any other religion, let's go by a rule that Jesus himself had within the Gospels of you will know them by their works. Now, that's not my justification for going this route, but I'm just think of it rhetorical flair.
Ooh, I would have avoided that if I were you, but you go ahead.
When it comes to morality, if anything is true within a moral context, pragmatic point of view, if I am going to accept some kind of and I know that ought implies can. If I ought to do something, then I can do it. When it to anything, I think a moral system has to have a means of human perfection, morally perfect. And if that's the case, then it means we can be morally perfect. Some might argue, why ought we be morally perfect in the first place? But if that's the case, consider this. If I'm not supposed to be, if there is no imperative for me to be morally perfect, but then pretty much I can get away with any act of immorality.
You can now.
Yeah.
I'm why saying I can. I mean, I shouldn't be held blameworthy for any moral wrongdoing. Which, if a judge was to bring me to court and put up as a legitimate defense, well, look, nobody is morally perfect. Nobody can be morally perfect. If anything, you're gonna fail, and you should. And my moral failing just happened to be this time robbing a bank. It happens. But I'm pretty sure that kind of justification wouldn't happen under any court of law. However, the great thing about Christianity is relation where about what makes sense to me in terms of explanatory power is the fact that it offers a mode of action, namely through the death and atonement of Jesus Christ.
Well, I was under the impression you were going to justify the claim that God is good, because and that you were talking about, an appeal to authority is not always fallacious, because someone who is in a position to know can reveal knowledge to me. And I asked, how do we know that God is in a position to do that? That He is in fact morally good. And I'm not hearing an explanation for that.
I just wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, go for it.
What is your definition of morally perfect?
Apparently God.
Mine?
Yes.
Me.
Yeah.
Right. Just to go to Brenda's point first, when I was, in terms of getting a justification, what I was doing was giving a pragmatic justification concerning Christianity to be authoritative, and pragmatic justification.
Okay.
And the reason I was providing a pragmatic justification was, you can know a person by a position of authority in terms of what explains moral data. And one of the things that explained moral data was the fact that he offered a mechanism for the fact that human beings can achieve moral perfection. What is moral perfection? In terms of any kind of moral framework, it is just obeying the moral imperatives, issues, or conclusions that one might draw from them. So if you're
okay, so moral perfection is obeying the moral imperatives, right? And so then we know
Always
that God.
always abiding by moral conclusions. Given the
Yeah, so we know that God is good because God always obeys the moral imperatives. Is that right?
So what I was explaining was what it means for a human being to be morally perfect. That would be the case under any system of morality. So if you were a consequentialist, of course, it would be maximize. It would be whenever you could maximizing human happiness or human flourishing.
Right.
Right. And in terms of,
I understand these things. You know, I actually do know.
Well.
So then why are you doing a special pleading for God? Why is God not subject to this rule?
Because God is not something which is good by proxy, but rather is the standard for goodness.
Well, I thought the standard was obeying the moral imperatives.
Wait, so my standard is trying to become God? Isn't that kind of blasphemy?
No. What? So there's a distinction to be had between what it means to be the standard or the source and what it means to abide by it.
But you said the standard was obeying the moral imperatives, and so I just took you at your word and said that God therefore must be obeying the moral imperatives, right? Or do you want to go double back on yourself yet again?
I was explaining that. I was explaining when I was making or putting forward my argument. I was explaining it for human beings underneath any kind of moral framework, consequentialism, deontology. That's why that definition had to be pretty broad.
So this only applies to human beings.
Argument, yes, because the existence of God would not have been established at that point.
I'm sorry, parts of that cut out.
It's not established at this point.
And I just don't get it, because you say that the standard for morality is obedience of moral imperatives. I know what imperatives are. I know what obedience is. And I don't see why you're dancing around and saying that God, obviously then the way we would know God is good is that he obeys the moral standards, right? But if you're just going to say that, well, these moral standards only apply to humans, then I just have to repeat myself. How do we determine that God is good? Because you said the way we can know that some of these moral commandments of God are good is because we do an appeal to authority, and God is in a position to know what is good, right? Because he has the relevant, I guess, expertise in that. But you haven't established that God is good, or that he has that relative expertise. You said that being the good is or what we know of as good is obeying the moral standards. But then you deny that God obeys those moral standards. I mean, you're just all over the place.
As if God set the standards one time and just never ever changed.
Well, I was to say, for example, that a man was a good someone was to shoot his grandmother at 500 yards. I think he was a good shot, but I'd say he wasn't a good grandson.
He could be a good person, though, couldn't he? I mean, is it wrong to shoot your grandmother at 500 yards?
I think you're just avoiding the point of the example. The point
is it wrong to shoot your grandmother at 500 yards?
I'm just going to continue without your.
I mean, because there could be situations where it would be good to shoot your grandmother at 500 yards.
But if she's got a bomb strapped to her chest, she's about to go to school.
Yeah. Then it would be good.
Either way,
I think at this point, okay, yeah, I'm just.
it's about time to change just a little bit. So,
yeah, I'm going
Catholic.
So yeah, the point I'm making revelation. So I think.
Well, let me know when you can figure out whether or not God is good and how I could know that God is good. Could you do that?
Could you just let me speak for a minute rather than just interrupting?
I've given you plenty of options to speak, and I've allowed you to talk, and your audio has been very difficult to understand, but I have waited patiently and asked questions here and there, but you refuse to answer straightforward questions. You continually sidetrack, and you make exceptions and special pleading and fallacious arguments. So no, you don't get to talk. I do. The simple fact is you're trying to avoid the very simple conclusion that everybody can see. That you want to say God is good because God is good because God is good. That's what you want to say. And you're trying to avoid saying that because it's obviously not a moral claim. It's just divine command theory. It's good to obey God because it's good to obey. That's what you do, is you obey.
And all right, you know what? I'm only going to continue this conversation, not because I think you're an honest interlocutor, but because I'm having fun with this. The whole point of the analogy was to demonstrate that one word can be used in multiple ways and not in an equivocal sense. The point of good in those senses was a good shot is not the same as to say somebody is a morally good person. They just mean somebody is good insofar as they can fulfill some kind of function, as opposed to another. And my point of using God, using the term morally perfect there, wasn't to apply to any and all agents. It was specifically applied to speak of moral perfection concerning human beings. Obviously, a being who is perfect doesn't need moral perfection. They're already at that position. Now,
well, you haven't established that God is morally perfect. That's just begging the question yet again.
If you weren't such this point much quicker, if you didn't like to escalate things, but clearly you do. So, when it comes to God, so when it came to earlier, my point about moral epistemology through revelation, that was established. Me making a pragmatic argument right now. That's what I was coming to. I'm establishing the fact that the Bible is an authentic form of moral authority because it fits the datum of a good moral system having a mechanism to attain moral perfection. Much earlier, too.
Do you think you can establish objective morality with a pragmatic argument? Can you establish an objective moral system with a pragmatic argument? Are you out of your mind?
Yeah. Immanuel Kant didn't do that.
No, he didn't.
It might be more fruitful to change topics right now.
Yes, he did. It. What was it? The critique of pragmatic reasoning? Or the critique of practical reasoning?
It was the critique of practical reasoning.
This is going nowhere.
I have a question if you are willing to humor me. But it's sort of out of left field.
I mean, sure.
Funny field.
I don't want to interrupt you. All right. Here are the facts. I'm adopting a baby girl, and I left a church, but I absolutely feel as if the community I was raised in, it had good intentions, and I want to provide the very best for her. I'm just hesitant to...
Hey, welcome, buddy, to a very special
join
event
the church
today.
again.
We have Emperor Atheist
I want to provide her
versus
with a
the
healthy
Catholic.
community. It's just... I'm sort of afraid that it's a girl, and if I bring her to a Christian church, certain roles and things will be forced upon her, and I mean, what if she grows up and turns out she's gay too? I want provided with the community of a church, but also I live in a small town and I have like 3 choices, and one of them's Baptist, and that's not happening.
I don't know, become a Unitarian?
Well, there's a United Church. My question for you guys is, what do you think about the idea of a non-believer showing up, paying lip service, but trying to get the very best he can for his daughter, because the support is there.
Don't feel bad, because I kind of do that sometimes on holidays for my family, because they're all very, very Christian, and I am not at all.
So
really like my daughter.
Solid year, I went to church every Sunday just to make my mom feel better. While she knew I was an atheist at that.
Yes.
So is modern atheism, raising people, and I'll have with her the tooth fairy talk, the Santa talk, and eventually the Jesus talk? I mean, I want her to...
So what I'm going to do with my children is I'm going to raise them without a religion, but when the time comes and they give me the question about religion, I'll ask them if they're really interested, and if they are, we'll sit down and we'll go over the key points of every religion that I can find. We'll go over their holy texts. We'll go over what their preachers. We'll go over what they preach. We'll go over what the religion's about. All of that. We'll go over what they do today, and at the end, if they've picked one, they can just prescribe to it, and if they didn't, then they don't have to. I will teach my children how to think, not what to think.
I believe that to be very fair, but at right now, I'm still trying to be concerned with the practical aspects of raising a child, and we're going with cloth diapers, and we're going. I'm trying to surround myself with certain community supports, and sure enough, a lot of those community supports, the money comes straight from little old ladies and their tithes. The Salvation Army was able to give us, dozens of baby socks because goodness knows, people draw out those purse strings Easter Sunday and at Christmas. I'm trying to figure out how I can nurture this child and also strip away some of the weird dogmatic stuff that comes with it. I want her to love to sing. I'm just trying to come to terms with the fact that in most of the songs, the he will be uppercase, Am I making any sense here?
Makes perfect sense to me.
I don't see how I can possibly advise you. I mean, this is your life and your child.
Fake it till I make it.
I just kind of go with the flow, and if I think something's ridiculous, I'll explain to her that I think it's ridiculous. If it doesn't really make a big impact on her, then I'll just let her make up her own mind.
That's fair.
You want a community that reflects your own viewpoint rather than enter into a community that's already been established.
I'm in a town of 1,200. I moved
churches than bars.
Right, and so I understand that part. Honestly, if none of the communities, well, then just raise your daughter and let her decide.
I guess this is one of the first steps that eventually she's going to have to decide everything for herself. She'll be a young, independent woman, and I can only hope to set a foundation where I think I'm doing the best. But just in case, we're not going Jehovah's Witness so she can get blood transfusions. What
the
fuck? So there's Baptist, Jehovah's Witness, United, Catholic, all in this town of 1,200. And
surprisingly enough, the Mormons are actually really cool a lot of times. So if you had a Mormon church, I would actually honestly suggest them, especially since a bunch of the stuff they say is so obviously crazy.
See, when you're starting with a kid, obviously crazy, isn't good enough, because once a year she'll hear about a fat bearded man sneaking down the chimney. And obviously crazy was, oh, boy.
Yeah, I honestly would skip over the whole Santa Tooth Fairy thing myself.
Yeah, and fusionist, I mean no disrespect, but part of the reason we're not going Catholic is so that I can avoid seeing her in a passion play. You know what I mean? I just have no idea how I'm going to connect these dots after I took a step back and started, somebody says, here, hamburgers are great. And then the first time you go out to a great new fancy hoity-toity restaurant and they give you a deconstructed burger and you're like, what in the heck is this? You realize just how weird it is to slap cheddar cheese, bacon, and Thousand Island dressing on the same thing. Anyways, I'm rambling now about burgers because I'm fat and I like burgers.
Well, the cheddar cheese and the bacon, definitely. I'm not so sure about the ranch.
I like bacon. Then again, I also eat ketchup on my ice cream. Don't question me.
I have pineapple on my pizza. It's all good.
You are an abomination.
Anyways, I have a question back on the more religious topic we were having earlier. Oh, that was religious, but still. Catholic, I wanted to ask if you've ever had a divine revelation, or if somebody came to you and said that they had had a divine revelation, if you would believe them.
Have I ever had a divine revelation?
Yes. Well, basically, has God ever spoken to you?
Oh, I got one for this after Catholic.
I have gone through a religious experience, but I wouldn't say it's a form of revelation. And else has made that claim and come with me to that. I've actually never had someone do that either.
But if somebody came to you and said, for example, an angel came to them the last night and gave to them a divine revelation, would you believe them?
To the revelation.
Depends on the revelation.
He saw a man on a white horse.
They saw the end of the world. This angel brought to them news of the end of the world.
Well, I disbelieve it, mostly because Christ says no man shall know the time of his return.
The day or the hour.
What if it's a woman now? I'm joking. I'm joking.
Oh boy.
How about they said an angel had sent them to inform you of something, in any miscellaneous thing that you might have wrong.
It would depend on the thing that they said I'd have wrong.
Well, let's start.
That's really weird.
Go from there.
I thought you said revelatory knowledge was somebody in a position to know better than you. And they give you. I didn't hear you say anything about you being able to judge whether or not what they give you is true or not.
So this is actually why Jesus says you will know them by their works. The Apostle Paul says, test all things, hold on to the good, and why Scripture is usually pretty clear that if an angel preaches something to you contrary to the gospel we have given you, you can then let them be anathema. The whole point is, new revelation cannot contradict what has been revealed prior, provide you a contradiction, nor can it provide you something which is contrary to the faith as you hold it, as it has been shown before.
Well, how do you know that's true?
So now you want to fact check the divine revelation?
I don't just accept anything that's a divine revelation blindly.
Isn't that what the Bible is?
Pretty much.
Nope. But no, Paul himself actually in Hebrews says the reason we know and have faith in God is because of the triumph of Israel and the triumph of our ancestors, and he gives very specific examples of
what about the Old
Testament prophets and patriarchs succeeding under various scenarios. It was by faith that Abraham did this and this other person did that.
But multiple times in the Old Testament, we see somebody being spoken to directly by God. That's definition of divine revelation.
And say it wasn't.
If you didn't fact check.
But in any time God came forward to a prophet or a patriarch, it usually came with, accompanied with great miracles, usually as a way to verify that they
Well,
themselves...
how does it verify anything? That doesn't verify anything. Because all you know, it's believe what I say, don't believe that other guy.
It is plenty of things. So there are plenty of things in our interactions with people that make us more convinced than not that they are in the up and up. Usually if they tell us something and these things come true, reason to believe them than not. It's a way of building up reliability.
But that's not revelatory knowledge. That would just be justified knowledge.
Yeah, but you usually have to justify. You have to give reasons. Or
Is revelatory knowledge justified or isn't it?
But it is a necessary condition.
You know, I just don't understand, because you keep talking out of both sides of your mouth. You say it's one thing and then you say it's another.
When it has to be justified, of course, you have to know that that person is in a position of authority. If somebody said, "Hey, I'm a scientist," okay, great. But if they said, I'm a scientist, here are my degrees, here are my credentials, I'm like, okay, yeah, those are accompanying signs that I would expect if you are in a position of authority.
How does one get religious credentials?
You send a postcard into a post office box number, and you pay them money. That's how you get religious credentials.
At all. That's not charitable. One of the things that, like, I can't stand the lack of charity. Let me tell you something. As somebody that has worked in church for years, I can tell you that serious people, not G-mans, but serious people who do pursue clergy do a lot of studying, rigorous study. They learn Greek. They learn Hebrew. They write papers. They know church history and theology. Now, yes, you could go and apply for like a universal church clergy member thing, so you can, do your friend's wedding or whatever. That's fine. Or even a humanist one. That's fine. But to be charitable, a lot of people who go to seminary do put in a lot of work and do have a lot of knowledge, and they do have rigorous study, and I do not think that's charitable at all.
What isn't charitable is also the fact that I also pointed out that prophets verified themselves by also showing signs of the miraculous, wonder, events to come. Not to, as I said, it's Paul.
So God, if somebody does magic tricks, then I can believe that what they say is true.
Redwater.
You got to do magic tricks.
I just want to tell you, I've seen Brenda do this before. Brenda, you're great at throwing things and darts and backing people into a corner. But really, we don't have a good dialogue. It's not an actual good conversation. It's just that you want to feel better about yourself and superior, and you want to win. I got it. Well, I mean, that tactic might work with the godless girls and the jacks and stuff like that. But really, I don't enjoy it. I don't really respect you. Sorry. And I love it when you have meltdowns. I think they're hilarious.
And I never, yeah, and her magic trick.
It's exactly what you described, signs and wonders.
The miraculous, whenever, that's how, and usually that's how God showed that he was a reliable or dependable source to the various prophets he revealed himself to. And of course, those signs and wonders went off and were attested through various other generations. I've repeated that twice, and yet no reference was made to that.
Can you cite one prophecy that came true?
Not in the Bible either.
I believe they're looking for contemporary examples. Like,
And
how,
yeah, sure. During Fatima, yeah, sure. During the miracle of Fatima, the Virgin Mary actually revealed that Russia itself would come back onto the Christian faith. Time it was occupied by godless communists, and lo and behold, that's exactly what happened.
godless communists.
Godless communist. Wow.
Communists weren't godless.
Explain to me how Fatima was a miracle.
Prophecy?
Do you believe that the sun danced around in the sky?
That's called a mirage, by the way.
That was one of the wonders that they saw, the sun dancing in the sky.
Do you think that's what happened?
Well, this has been weird. You guys have a wonderful night, and thank you again for humoring my question. Take care.
So did the sun dance around in the sky? Is that what happened?
That's what I said.
So you believe that the sun danced around in the sky?
I have a bit of a repetition problem there.
I have not heard a clear answer to the question.
Okay, well, the evidence given was that the miracle of Fatima, and in the miracle of Fatima, what happened was that hundreds of people stared at the sun, and they hurt their eyes, and this caused a lot of hallucinations and false images because they damaged their eyes by staring at the sun. That's what happened. The sun didn't dance around in the sky, because if it had, the Earth would have been destroyed. So, and the moon also would have been knocked out of its orbit. The Earth would have been knocked out of its orbit. But these were ignorant people back in the early 20th century. They had no clue. They were just religious and ignorant. And they thought that staring at the sun, that they saw things, and they attributed these to a miraculous appearance by Mother Mary. And it did not happen. And so if that's your standard for us knowing whether or not slavery is moral or not, it's just sad. It's just sad, because that's what this whole conversation is about. It's about you trying to justify slavery in the Bible. That's what this whole thing is about, and it's just ridiculous.
In the mirror. So I find it funny that God is omnipotent, and yet he can't make the sun dance for a localized people certain point in time. Yet earlier in the conversation, God could do basically anything ever. So I really love the double talk. Second, any problem with in a miraculous claim of the sun moving for the viewpoint of a localized.
Well, that's fine. I don't mind putting you on record as saying that you believe this. That's fine with me.
Point of prophecy. was was the prediction of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the return the Russian people to Orthodox Christianity.
Oh, really? I think the Russian people would like to see that happen, but that's not what happened. They're ruled by a brutal dictator.
Yeah, brutal dictator under the godless communists.
Yes, they were ruled by brutal dictators under the communists. Yes, but you said returned to something else. But that's not what happened. What happened is that the Soviet Union collapsed, and in the political vacuum, what happened was that various oligarchs and mafia people simply seized power, and the people have been suffering ever since.
The point during the reign of the Soviet Union.
So the prophecy was not fulfilled. The prophecy was not fulfilled
during the reign of the Soviet Union, and propagandists to Orthodox villages to tell the people of godless Marxist materialism and how what they believed before was backward superstition. A priest. There was one story of even a priest who stood up, and this is just fantastic, diatribe of one of these propagandists, speaking ill of the church, who said, "Okay, everyone, you've heard the opposition, but Christ is risen." Everyone said on Easter, "Indeed, he has risen." The Soviet Union happened. That those propagandists were no more. The spectacular failure of Marxist-Leninism was seen on display, broke down, and was taken by the oligarchs and the mafia men. It was still better than what they had before, and now Russia has drastically improved from the 1990s into what has become as a modern superpower now.
Yay, Putin, I guess, huh?
Stronger in Russia has done nothing but come even stronger in Russia than it was before. And the fact of the matter is that you would denigrate the trials and tribulations of such a people, returning back to a position where they could more openly and freely express their ingrained Orthodox belief away from these propagandists is really sad.
I haven't denigrated anybody. I'm not a communist.
What I said was you denigrated their time of communist oppression beforehand, relatively freer now, and much freer to practice their religion currently in the present as a way of avoiding the claim of prophecy.
I said nothing about communism. I said that the prophecy was not fulfilled because they suffered under communism, and now they're suffering under a brutal dictator. I don't see how that fulfills the prophecy, and I don't see how you can demonstrate
their prophecy
that.
Wasn't
I don't see how you demonstrate that the fall of communism proves that the prophecy is true in the first place.
Well, you did ask for an example prophecy. That was one I was willing to give. In terms of why you were denigrating their status.
How does the fall of communism in the Soviet Union, in Russia,
why they were denigrating their status? That they they came from a status where they were not freely able to practice their religion without propagandists, without Marxists advocating for their materialist reading of history, to now you can one up. But the point of the prophecy wasn't that they'd cease suffering; it was that they'd cease suffering under communism and return to the Orthodox Christian faith. To say that has happened, I didn't say that there was not going to be any more suffering in Russia. That was not part of it.
Well, you're making a bad inference, which is you're just affirming the antecedent. So the fallacy that you're engaging in is like, if it rains, the streets will be wet. The streets are wet, therefore it rained. So the prophecy was that if the prophecy is true, then communism will fall. Communism fell, therefore the prophecy is true.
You could say the same thing about any kind of scientific prediction.
No, you can't. The science doesn't work that way.
Oh, really?
Really.
So how would the following inference work then? If human beings evolved from a common ancestor, then we'd all share a common genome. Sorry, if all beings descended from a common ancestor, then we'd all share a genome. Therefore, we all come from a common ancestor.
Yeah, that would be a bad reasoning. Yes, you're correct.
All right,
fortunately, nobody's dumb enough to say that.
About it work.
And that's not the inference that scientists use. Inference is all I heard.
Would scientists infer that the genome is evidence for?
Yeah, science does not make does not commit the fallacy of affirming the antecedent.
Answering the question, Brenda, answer it.
What was the question? Because you have been cutting in and out.
How would they make an inference that sharing a genome is evidence for something?
It would go like this: if it rains, the street will be wet. The street is not wet, therefore it has not rained. That's the proper inference. Right? And then you simply apply that to whatever a scientific discipline you're discussing at the time.
Saying is the scientists would reason like this: if we did not share a common genome, then
we would not see homology. We would not see homology. So homology is often cited as one line of evidence for common descent. Right?
Okay.
So we do not see various factors, and I don't know. It is late for me, and I am tired. You can look up on YouTube on yourself the charge that science is guilty of affirming the antecedent is a fallacious charge.
You're speaking about Ozzy's video. I like the homology reference. Yeah, but you could really argue in this, but you could really make the valid form too, which would be if the prophecy, false, if Russia was not liberated from Marxist communism and returned back to the Orthodox faith, but Russia was liberated from Marxist communism, returning to the Orthodox faith, therefore the prophecy is not false.
But that doesn't show it's true.
I've just read it as modus tollens as opposed to modus ponens, and made the same inference.
Well, unfortunately, prophecies have a tendency to be unfalsifiable, unlike scientific theories, which are falsifiable. There is no set of circumstances that could ever falsify a particular theory, unless you do have one.
Under this case, if let's say under this case, if Russia was still Marxist-Leninist, then yeah, it would have been falsified.
No, you just claim that it hasn't fallen yet.
if it was the case that Russia just became all atheists, and it was still the exact opposite of the prophecy would have happened. There were no more Christians in the. What if there was no more Christianity on the globe? Then you definitely know the prophecy was falsified.
That's true.
You're in a falsification.
So you would take the diminishing number of Christians in the world as evidence that prophecy in Christianity is false?
I think that follows.
Christianity is actually growing in a lot of places within the world too. Usually, we just limit it to the West. It's actually growing in places like China, Asia as well.
I believe that globally, though, the numbers are declining, aren't they?
Yeah, in the West, given Europe and North America, but that's mostly because right now a lot on contraceptive use and the fact that Islam is growing more in population. And usually that's mostly because proponents of birth control tend to not believe in birth nor control.
Well, if Islam is growing in population, then it must be true.
Well, it would depend. Does Islam have prophecies that Islam will increase in number?
I'm not sure there is a prophecy in Islam about that. In any case, it's not because the population of Christians isn't declining. One has to take into account that many of the people identified as Christian within Europe to begin with were not very nominal believers. Many of them were baptized into the Catholic Church, put under a census, but were never really practicing to begin with. Besides, limited trends don't really offset this.
Starting to feel a little ad hoc.
Yeah, it's pretty much been that way the whole time.
What I'm saying is,
most prophecies are.
Being ad hoc, I'm actually calling into question the evidence used of Christian decline. That's not being ad hoc. That's just critiquing the evidence that's used against my position.
I wasn't even necessarily claiming that it is. I'm just saying, would it be a criteria? If Christianity is in decline, would you take that as a sign?
All right, is everybody done? Looks like there's.
Seems like it.
I'm done.
All right, I'm gonna go play some guitar. So, pretty good stream. I'm gonna be probably running these more often, just from this particular Discord. The only problem I have is I can only stream one channel at a time. So that'll be the stream live feed that is we're using now, but I know there are some other channels want to start using it, which is just fine. They can stream to their channel. I don't know. Do you want me to start a stream tonight and then just leave it like I did last night, and you guys can do what the hell you want with it? Maybe at midnight or something. Yeah, whatever. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, whatever.
I mean, if people want to drop in, it's not a big deal to me to leave it running. I just obviously it takes a lot of computer power, so. All right, well, thanks a lot for watching this. It was a good debate. CF. I mean, I thought you did fine. I mean, I don't particularly agree with that perspective, but at least you defended it way better than some other people would have done. So, props to you on that. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.